This video will really help if you've recently experienced or are currently going through redundancy. And I'm going to start by outlining the end conclusion, which is that whilst job loss can indeed be traumatic, the difficult emotions you're feeling are completely natural. They will eventually pass, and you can again create a fulfilling and enriched future. Employment involves a large portion of one's total waking hours, and aside from the obvious financial considerations, it provides daily structure, goal focus, sociality, belonging and identity. So for many, the experience of enforced job loss will massively disrupt normality and even a sense of who we are and who we can become. Just like other grief-inducing forms of loss, it may feel as though the world will never be the same again. I'll discuss the more commonly experienced emotional states, share some practical coping strategies, and in the part 2 video, we'll look at how you can move forward with a renewed sense of hope. Before we dive into the detail, I want to mention a couple of important things. Firstly, psychologists concur that negative emotions actually serve important functions. So whilst it's good to manage and lessen their intensity, it's best not to ignore or repress them altogether. Or they can still drive your subconscious and potentially cause even more issues later. Though it may be more uncomfortable initially, it's better to openly connect to your feelings, explore what's going on inside, and actively work through any post-traumatic healing process. Studies in the 1990s by two renowned professors of organisations and management demonstrated that the optimum approach for many who experience job loss is a combination of coping strategies that focus both on resolving the actual direct cause of the stress itself, i.e. the practical elements that can help with re-employment, as well as strategies which can alleviate the emotional stress resulting from job loss. And it's this second area that's really critical but often overlooked. Research shows that those who neglect to manage negative emotions are substantially less successful in their job hunting compared to those who do. Which is perhaps unsurprising considering it's actually very difficult to really think straight, prepare your CV and attend interviews whilst your emotions are still very raw and intense. I'm aware that for many, this particular video may well be the most critical one right now. The second key point I want to mention is that whilst I'm almost a 25-year veteran of recruitment and CV writing, I'm not a psychotherapist or psychologist. I knew full well that I couldn't approach this topic without reviewing some of the principal studies and relevant research over the past 40 years. So I've done my homework and I'll provide some key references in the FAQ section on the Career Atoms website. I'm also very grateful to have had fantastic input and insight from Dr. Sally Maitlis, a renowned psychotherapist and Professor of Organisational Behaviour and Leadership at the University of Oxford's Saïd Business School. Over the years, she's published research into the psychological impact of job loss and has become a particular expert on sensemaking, which we'll come to discuss a little bit later on. I'm delighted that she's taken the time to personally review, edit and endorse these comments. Let's now look at the key emotions linked with job loss and how they can best be managed. In 1969, a Swiss-American psychiatrist named Elisabeth Kubler-Ross wrote about 5 stages of grief, and whilst these were originally aligned with her observations of working with the terminally ill, these have also been commonly applied to other experiences of trauma, including job loss. I've cross-referenced her theories with John Fisher's Observed Emotions Following Major Occupational Change to produce a list of 7 common emotional states. And I'll call them states rather than stages because each person's experience is unique, and the list isn't meant to be exhaustive, linear, or some kind of map that conveniently plots out your individual journey. Not everyone will start in the same point, move in a sequential pattern, or even experience every state. Some will jump quickly from one to another, and whilst others might feel stuck and seemingly unable to move on altogether. Multiple states can be experienced in parallel, and prior emotions can be revisited again. All of which can leave you feeling disoriented, without foundation and wondering if you're making any progress at all. There's no prescribed right or wrong way to experience loss, so be patient with this healing process and don't compare your response to that of any others. In the aftermath of job loss news, you may experience denial, a natural defence mechanism that enables you to cope with immediate shock and disbelief, numbing the intensity of the trauma whilst you gradually absorb and process everything. Signs that you're in denial are rationalisation, excuse-making, disbelief and minimisation of reality. You may be unaware that you're in denial, or alternatively you might knowingly bury your head in the sand and cling to a false hope that employment can be salvaged. Either way, lingering denial becomes problematic as it hinders the healing process, it masks emotions and it stops you regaining control of your life. Research has also demonstrated that unabated, longer-term denial can even accelerate major physical health issues. So acknowledge your pain and hurt and give yourself some time to adjust. This isn't personal failure. There's no shame in redundancy, particularly in the current climate. So open up to close family and friends and draw on their support. If you have an immediate family, give spouses, partners and children the chance to talk about their reactions and concerns. Explain the economic conditions that have led to the job loss, gather ideas for how everyone will cope and provide reassurance that the family will work together through this challenging period. David Kessler, an internationally recognised grief expert who worked very closely with Kubler-Ross in her later years, said, "As you begin to accept the reality of the job loss, you are unknowingly beginning the healing process. You are becoming stronger and the denial is beginning to fade." Our brains are naturally hardwired to experience the primal evolutionary instinct of fear when facing threat, and because abandonment is considered one of the two primary roots of fear, you can understand how job loss can be such a key trigger. Initial fears might include major concern that you won't be able to find another job and pay the bills, that family and friends will think less of you and see you as a failure, that career and personal goals or ambitions are over or at least severely disrupted, or that you're simply just not good enough. We need to recognise that fear is essentially a projection into the immediate, near-term or longer-term future of something going badly. And we're all usually much better at creating negative narratives of these projections rather than positive ones. Fear can be damaging when it begins to sap your strength and inhibit you from taking necessary actions. It's difficult to banish fear altogether, and since it's a safety mechanism, you probably wouldn't want to anyway. But it can be controlled, managed and reduced. Dr. Pippa Grange is the sports psychologist and coach who worked closely with England's 2018 World Cup football team, and she was credited with helping them break their penalty shootout jinx. She's just written a book called Fearless: How to Win at Life Without Losing Yourself. One of the things that she talks about is the need to pause, override the evolutionary system, and instead replace in-the-moment reactionary fear with a much more measured and rounded risk calculation. So, reflect on your job loss and be honest in listing everything that you're afraid of. Consider what each fear is costing you, exactly what you're losing as a result, and importantly, deal with each fear directly. For example, if it's a fear about finances, talk to your bank, mortgage provider, and an independent financial advisor. Find out what support options exist and assess where you'll be able to adjust some budgets. In so doing, acquired new information can often help quash uncertainty, and you may find that some fears are actually unfounded and can be quickly dismissed, whilst others aren't quite as valid as you'd initially imagined. Put fear in its place and focus only on those things that have validity. Have the courage to stand your ground, taste the fear, but don't give it any more room in your life than you absolutely have to. Reach out to loved ones for support, of course. Dr. Grange helped the England footballers to overcome penalty-taking fears by reframing the experience not as a threat and something to be scared of, but much more as an opportunity. Similarly, where you can, try reframing the narrative of your fears into opportunities, adventure, and possibilities. Taking hold of and controlling the narrative of your fear is critical to stop it becoming overwhelming and paralysing. Also think back to other times in your life where you faced fear and recognise that whilst it was uncomfortable, perhaps even very difficult at the time, you did manage to overcome and survive each situation, so you can similarly do so again. Finally, Dr. Grange suggests the importance of not losing sight of your dreams and ambitions. She admonishes, come back to your sense of purpose. Remember what you care about. Think about why it's so compelling and focus your attention on that. There's a massive antidote to fear in holding on to what you want your life to look like. As your natural fight or flight response to threat starts to kick into overdrive, cortisol, the body's stress hormone, may be surging, and you might experience some physical symptoms of anxiety and stress, including a rapid heartbeat, high blood pressure, continual worrying, digestive problems, poor sleep, and irritability. There are some things that you can do that might help. First, plan periods of time where you'll log out of social media accounts and leave your phone switched off. Go for a walk outdoors, use some guided meditation apps that you can freely download, and learn relaxing techniques which slow down and deepen your breathing so that it's from your belly rather than from your chest. I've included some additional info on these in the website FAQs. You could also look at mindfulness. This entails paying close attention to the present moment, being acutely aware of your thoughts, feelings, senses and the world around you, all of which can be easily overlooked when you're caught up in your emotions and you're operating on autopilot. With practice, it helps rewire the brain towards savouring the present moment. And whilst it sounds counterintuitive, rather than actually avoiding anxiety altogether, which can make things worse, you experience your stressful thoughts during mindfulness, but as an objective observer rather than a victim. It can be hard at first, but if you stick with it, mindfulness can help anxiety symptoms dissipate, because it helps you to stand back and see any unproductive and stressful worries as mental events that come and go without you needing to be drawn into them. It's a bit like watching thought buses go by without always having to get on them. Over time, you can learn to disassociate yourself from unproductive worries. Scientific research has demonstrated a number of positive psychological and physiological benefits resulting from mindfulness. One large-scale study in 2011 specifically assessed its impact on people with anxiety disorders, and it concluded that there were observable, robust and substantial reductions of anxiety symptoms. You can find a lot more information online, including the nhs.uk website, which also has an anxiety self-test and other resources. I've also put a mindfulness exercise in the FAQs from acclaimed author Ron Siegel. If you need additional professional support with anxiety, a psychotherapist would help further with suitable mindfulness and/or cognitive-based therapy. When you realise that enforced change is real and you start to let go of some of the initial fear, you may experience anger. Regardless that redundancy isn't personal, it's natural to experience painful feelings of being deserted and abandoned, leading to frustration, annoyance, bitterness, resentment, and even rage. You might ask, why me? It's not fair. How could they do this after everything I've done over the years? Often the anger is initially directed externally towards the blaming of other people, such as a manager, a CEO, colleagues, or more broadly, the company as a whole, the economy, or even the government. Anger can also be directed inwards, and you may blame yourself for being in this position and somehow not having done enough to alter events. The risk in not managing anger effectively is that it can become wholly consuming, spiralling into guilt and depression, or boiling over to the point where prior to leaving your job, you carelessly start to damage relationships. You damage the goodwill you've built up and the chance to secure positive references. Most recruiters and hiring managers will also have witnessed the interview candidate that's literally gone into a full-on 10-minute rant when asked about their last company and their leaving circumstances. This is obviously a huge turn-off to any prospective employer. Again, we need to recognise that feelings of anger are common, they're natural, and they're part of the healing process. Research into anger management talks about the importance of allowing yourself to feel the emotion and control your reaction rather than suppressing or pretending that anger isn't there. Only then will it begin to subside and dissipate. Pri Malhotra, an Australian psychologist who's conducted anger management research, says that when you're able to access anger, the experience can actually be quite empowering. She says that whether you choose to see it that way or not, it's a sign that you're working things through because you now recognise that you matter and that you deserve more. As well as the breathing techniques and meditation already flagged, here are some other practical things that you can do to help reduce feelings of anger. You could look at muscle relaxation. Slowly tense and then relax each muscle group in the body one at a time. Start at the top of your head and gradually move all the way down to your toes. You can also do some exercise. Scientific research has highlighted the significant impact that exercise has on reducing anger. One such study with 3,500 people in Finland showed that those who exercise 2 to 3 times a week experienced significantly less anger, depression and stress than those who didn't exercise at all. It was also then shown that 5 or 6 days of exercise a week reduced the levels of negative emotions even further compared to the group who did 2 to 3 days of exercise. So go for a brisk walk, a bike ride, a run, lift weights or any other form of physical activity. This will burn off excess energy, help reduce blood pressure and release some powerful endorphins that can positively alter your mood. Also recognise the key triggers. You may find that you're consistently getting angry over specific things over and over again. It could be a child's untidy bedroom, watching your football team, or reading the news. Whatever your own triggers are, if at all possible, try to avoid them whilst you're going through this period. This concludes part 1 of coping with job loss. In the second part, we'll discuss the remaining 3 emotional states: bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Before then, looking at how you can begin to look to the future with a renewed sense of hope. Thank you very much for watching.